Hey, logical listeners, welcome to today's weekly live stream talking about peace and conflict studies. In today's video, we're going to be having a conversation talking about conflict plans and conflict management. For those of you who don't remember from last week's live stream, conflict plans are basically generalized policies that help people in charge of businesses, organizations, and communities have plans pre-prepared to help them figure out what's going on in a conflict and to some extent manage the conflict and even resolve or transform it. So in today's live stream, I want to start off by saying that these management plans are generally very vague. They're generally more, not so much like specific responses, which is a part of conflict management, but more so a tool that's used by people to help them figure out what's going on in a conflict and also be aware of the policies and toolkits that have been designed to help companies resolve conflicts internally. And I want to say that it's really important that people realize this because it's entirely possible that people are going to get bogged down in the details when trying to come up with a conflict plan, which is something that's really disruptive and is something that isn't very conducive to actually responding to conflicts, because that's more conflict management, which is one of the things we're going to talk about later on in today's particular video. So for some reason, I'm trying to see if this is working properly because it says that someone is watching, but for some reason the screen hasn't changed. Tight. Yes, it has. I was incorrect. Aha, technology. So I'm going to talk about specifically a corporate conflict plan. And in order for us to be able to learn from each other just a bit better, what I want to say is that I want you to envision that you've been asked either by the company that you work for, or you've tasked yourself with, if it's your company, coming up with a conflict plan for your workplace. And some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today are basic tips that I have that help people who have very little idea, if any idea, what's going on when it comes to conflict work, how to better plan conflict plans. The first tip that I'm going to say is one that I've already talked about very briefly. Remember that a conflict plan shouldn't be overly detailed because conflicts are never one size fits all. Every conflict is going to have different factors, it's going to have different actors, it's going to have different steps that need to be taken to resolve it. The purpose of a conflict plan is to give managers and supervisors a tool that enables anyone who reads it to have a way to help them figure out what's going on in the conflict. It's a little bit of a toolkit to help you structure your responses and your initial steps. It's not something that people should take as gospel, and it's not something that people should be super eager to stick to. It's something that people should use as a sort of skeleton. And the steps that are in it are really important. The resources that are in it are really important. But what matters more than anything else is someone's own conflict management skills, which is part of the reason why some people in some businesses don't have conflict plans at all. That's never a good thing because different managers and different supervisors and even different actors in the conflicts themselves are not going to be super great when it comes to, at the very least, not 100% of the time, when it comes to trying to resolve or transform a conflict. And that's something that managers, supervisors, as well as the people involved in the conflicts themselves need to be cognizant of. I think it's really important that conflict plans provide tips and that they help people structure their responses, but not so much that they are outline specifically what it is that someone should do. So first and foremost, when we're trying to come up with a conflict plan, the first thing I would like for us to do is to think of what the business that we're creating the conflict plan for does. What goods does it sell? What skills does it provide its customers? This is really important, and it might not seem like it, but if you think of this, if you think of the people that you're working for, if you think of the employees that you've hired, then it's more easy for you to get yourself in the right state of mind when you are trying to say, think of how it is that the conflict could affect the bottom line of the people that you're working for, or of the thing that you're trying to achieve through the business. And remember that something that affects the bottom line doesn't have to affect the amount of dollars that's in your pocket, but rather it can affect how it is that the public perceives the business. And that's just as important because the way the public trusts and response to the public is a vital part of making sure that you have a continuous supply of business. That's something that people need to be aware of. It's something that they need to formulate, and it's something that they need to be thinking of whenever they're thinking of how it is they want their company to do a specific thing. The next thing that I would like for people to do is to take a second to think of resources related to conflict management that are already in the structure of the business, as well as that are within access of the business, that have relationships with the business. I'm sorry if my English seems off today. I am trying this out in a new way, and it seems that it's like messing with the way that I formulate words. I have my iPad next to me and it has my notes on it rather than having my notes in the background. So that way I can see what it is that I'm doing, and it's a little bit distracting having to look at it every once in a while. But what I'm talking about here when I talk about resources related to conflict management that are in the business, I'm talking about corporate structures like human resources that are a part of the business that affect conflict management and affect conflict transformation. Human resources is often, especially in a lot of larger businesses, the area of the business that handles conflicts. And that's perfectly fine for a lot of businesses. But if it's a structural battle, if it's a battle between a employee and a supervisor, then they're going to be uncomfortable in many cases having a structure of the business itself be one of the groups that handles the conflict. And that's something that managers need to be cognizant of, even and especially when they're the people that the conflict involves. Part of the reason why I think it's important that people write out a list of resources that their business can make use of when it comes to handling conflicts is because of the fact that if a person in a company doesn't feel comfortable and doesn't trust the structure of the business, then it's entirely possible that if the business seeks outside help, or if the employee seeks outside help to help resolve, respond to, or just manage the conflict, then that's something that is a very valid option. Most communities, even smaller communities, have access to conflict resolvers. There's conflict clinics, there are therapy groups, there's all sorts of things that enable people to better respond to conflict and that enable people to work with and learn about how to deal with conflict, as well as can help be a part of, say, mediation, arbitration, negotiations, or anything that can bring a conflict to an end. And that's something that's very useful. I think it's really important that managers, especially, be cognizant of the way that people are going to relate to the corporate structures as it comes to a conflict. My talking today has been really off, and but yeah. Also, howdy everyone. I'm just checking out the comment section for the first time. Um, I'm doing my best, but today has definitely been a weird day. So, but I'm happy that y'all are here. I am super excited that as the audience grows, the number of people who watch the live stream grows, and the number of people who interact with us in the comments also grow. So now that I've talked a little bit about that, I think it's worth noting that in a lot of cases, businesses are not going to have relationships with conflict resolvers. And that can be a good thing. There are lots of cases where conflict resolvers and conflict mediators are very excited to have opportunities to work with new businesses. That's something that can be extremely exciting for conflict resolvers, and it's an opportunity for businesses to build relationships with other businesses, especially local ones, because there aren't very many conflict resolution chains that exist in the United States. There are a handful, and at some point I probably will talk about them, but they are extremely rare. So fortunately, if you are going to interact with any sort of outside counsel, any sort of outside arbitrators or mediators, they're going to be locals, which in and of itself presents a good opportunity for most businesses. And a lot of businesses, especially larger ones, don't have relationships with local conflict resolvers. So it's great. Bij, I'm really sorry that that happened to you. I think it's really important that outsiders are made to not be outsiders, because I know a lot of cases where employees don't trust new people involved in the process, involved in mediation, involved in arbitration. That's something that I'm going to be talking about very briefly when I talk about conflict management later on. I am super excited that folks are now having conversations with themselves in the comments. That's really neat, because I know when I first started doing these weekly live streams, it was not a thing that happened. So to see it happening now is honestly really fantastic because it means that the familia is growing. It means that the number of people who watch this specific thing, which is one of my favorite things that I do weekly, are growing. I'm honestly just really excited to see the audience growing. And I am going to talk a little bit about outside resolution. But outside resolution is a good thing. And oftentimes, as people have been talking about in the comment section, and as I've talked about previously, it's one of the only reliable ways for people who are worried about the politics of dealing with things like conflicts between managers and entry level workers, and between managers and people who are, say, on the executive boards of companies and businesses. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about are to outline the basic steps of the company itself. So most companies already have existing structures and existing responses that are pre-built to conflicts. And oftentimes, these are reliable things that work in resolving small conflicts, which pop up all the time. Small conflicts are common, they're normal, and in a lot of ways, they're really healthy for companies. So it's okay for people to make use of normal conflict resolution measures, conflict transformation measures, and even conflict management, because not every conflict is going to be a new type of conflict. And I probably should have mentioned this before. There are definitely certain types of conflicts that are very common in workplace environments, and it matters that the conflict resolution steps are already there. They're already built in, and they are a part of someone's conflict plan. Oftentimes, what people are asked to do isn't to develop a new conflict plan, but rather to improve upon the existing conflict resolution structure of a company. That's something that I have actually done before. It's something that I have looked into, and it's something that I actually quite enjoy because I get to learn a lot about conflict work and conflict resolution and mediation whenever I go through and update existing conflict resolution structures. So if you are tasked with updating an existing conflict resolution structure, then what you should probably do is go ahead and incorporate the existing steps into your future plan. And if you are actually going to write out a physical plan or a digital plan, then you should go and find in places like the employee handbooks and the training that people give to supervisors and to managers to make them supervisors and managers. You should see where it is that conflict resolution plays a heavy role, and you should learn from that and build it into your improved structure. You shouldn't aim to replace an existing structure altogether. You shouldn't aim to scrap an existing structure unless it is extremely problematic. And I've talked about this before, but there are certain policies and there are certain practices that are fairly commonplace that are obviously problematic. The example that I used in the past was in some school districts, there are conflict resolution measures that include a face-to-face component of arbitration, which can be dangerous for certain types of complaints, like sexual harassment. And that's something that's problematic. And if it's shown to have a problematic history in the corporation that you're working for, you shouldn't be afraid to axe it altogether, but don't go into conflict plan building with the mindset of everything that's going on is wrong. And it's frustrating. And yeah, conflict, a change management process, which includes engagement, is really important. It's something that I strongly recommend. And it's actually something that doesn't always exist because The Office made a joke of this, but it's actually true that in some corporations, there is a complaint structure where complaints will be filed away and they will never actually be resolved. And that's frustrating because if a complaint is never resolved one way or another, then the complaints start to build up. Just because someone files a complaint doesn't mean that that's where their frustration is going to end. It's true that some people, in some minor cases, can often be happy just writing out their complaints and just having it on the record, but that's almost always not going to be the case, especially if the person who did the thing that caused the complaint isn't made aware that their actions are troubling other people. And that's something that's super important. So the first and real substantive part of any conflict management plan should involve information gathering. Information gathering is a super basic thing, but a lot of people don't know how to reliably gather information, and this is kind of a problem. A lot of people think that the key to gathering information just ends when someone talks to the person who filed the complaint. And that can be the case in extremely rare situations, but generally, the process of gathering information is a very thorough process that involves talking to multiple different parties. It involves talking to the people filing the complaint, it involves talking to the people that the complaint's about, and oftentimes, when applicable, a very smart thing to do, weird pronunciation. A very smart thing to do can be for someone to actually speak to any witnesses. This isn't always applicable because oftentimes things that cause someone frustration aren't going to frustrate someone else. And oftentimes people are going to feel the need to not complain and to just sort of file things away and to complain at most indirectly. So to go to a manager and to speak to that manager rather than speaking to the people that are causing the frustrations. And it's really important that people who are tasked with gathering information, no matter what role they have, are expected to go out and to actually speak to everyone and to gather as many accounts as possible. So there are a handful of ways that this can be done. One of the ways that I personally recommend is gathering like something that you can use to record testimonies with, say a cell phone or a microphone, just a recorder, and using that so that way you can play back the exact statements. And if you're going to do this, I would argue that it's probably important in most contexts. And I hate making generalizations, so that's part of the reason I use language like that. I know people have noticed it in the past, but that's just the way I talk. At the very least, when I'm talking about conflict resolution, I don't like making generalizations. So if you are going to record people's testimonies, a really important and often really ethical thing that you could do is you could record it and then you could either play back the recording for them then and there, or you can be like, hey, I'm going to email you, or I'm going to otherwise share the recording with you. So that way you can hear exactly what you said. You can make sure that everything corresponds to your memory. You can make sure that you feel comfortable saying this and having this on the record somewhere. Bees just made a really important point that everything should be 100% confidential. That is extremely important, especially when it comes to information gathering, because someone filing a complaint is very different from someone else gathering information. Someone can file a complaint and they can just describe a general situation without going into hyper specifics. But when someone's trying to gather information, it is often best that the information be as specific as possible. Another really important thing to do if someone doesn't feel like being recorded, which is fine. A lot of people don't feel comfortable being recorded. That's understandable. That's something that people who gather information need to be cognizant of and need to be ready to work with. If someone decides to not record the information, something that they can do is they can write down bits and pieces of the accounts that are related to the complaint in question, and then they can either repeat what they've written down or they can summarize what it is that the person who is talking to them said, and they can make sure that the person is okay with that being on record somewhere in some format or another. I feel like for a lot of cases, that's something that's probably going to be more common. And that's something that makes a lot of sense. I think that tons of people aren't feeling super comfortable with their exact testimonies, their exact accounts being recorded and then being made accessible to other people. That's something that is completely understandable. So I get it. And I think it's important that we recognize that's perfectly valid. These are some of the key first steps when it comes to handling these sorts of situations. Also, hey, Purple Rhymes with Orange. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you're excited to be here. I know I'm excited to be here. And I'm using this opportunity to take a break, catch my breath. But that is some basics when it comes to the beginning of coming up with a conflict management plan. Conflict management plans are really important. Also, I've been saying conflict management plan, and I should be saying conflict plan because conflict management plans are something else. But conflict plans, as mentioned before, are really important. In future live streams, it's not always going to be the focus, but different components and different types of conflict management plans are going to be what I talk about. I'm definitely not going to keep them the central focus because each time I'm going to be talking about something else. This time I'm going to be talking about conflict management practices as my secondary topic. And conflict management is actually the complex process. I feel you, Christy. I'm using a new iPad myself. I'm definitely not recording off of it, but it is a doozy to like work with in the background. That's part of the reason my eyes keep turning down. But conflict management is actually the process by which a lot of people are aware of a thing called conflict work. And conflict management is actually the tangible work that goes into conflict work. So conflict planning is the abstract in an ideal situation. When you are coming up with a conflict plan, you are hopefully doing it from the point of view of conflicts are going to happen, and here is a structure in place that can help deal with them, instead of dealing with an active conflict and then molding a conflict plan based off of how you handled that specific conflict. That's something that I've seen people do. It's something that can work for specific conflicts, and it can definitely be useful if someone's coming up with a template conflict response. That's a very valid response. That's a very valid way to go about it. But if you're involved in conflict management, what you're going to be doing is something else entirely. And I agree with what Mrs. just said. It is definitely better to have a plan ahead of time and to have a skeletal outline of what it is that people can do and what it is that people can say. So that way people could get used to things and not have to be super scared handling their first conflicts. Especially new managers. I've noticed that's a thing that happens. I've worked with new managers in the past, and I've worked with lots of different people. So that's an experience I have that I'm probably going to talk about in the future. But conflict managers are the actual people who step in and handle conflicts. And the very important tasks of conflict managers are generally to disrupt conflicts. Conflict managers aren't often the people who are actually going to be doing the peacemaking. They're often the people who are going to step in, assess a conflict, and then try to disrupt it. And you don't have to be a manager or a supervisor to be a conflict manager. There are people who have vital skill sets and the right attitudes that enable them to start off and be really good at disrupting conflicts that are already in motion. And oftentimes, those people aren't people in management. Those are other coworkers. Those are people who want to make sure that the workplace atmosphere is good. It's very neat. It's something that I've noticed in a lot of different office spaces, and it's something that I'm fond of because it shows that someone doesn't have to be a manager in order for them to be a vital part of the peacemaking process. And it also shows that someone doesn't have to be an outsider for them to be a positive force for peace, which is something that even in the corporate space, people forget. So yeah, conflict management conflict management is the work that goes into sort of stepping into a conflict and being like, all right, what can I do to disrupt this conflict? Because conflict disruption is something that's really important. And I feel like people hear the word disruption and they sort of think of it in the same way that they think of conflict. They think of it as like negative and they think of it as bad, but it really shouldn't be, because if you're disrupting something negative, I hope that what I'm saying makes sense. It's possible that I will go and do a video where I more like structurally talk about this, because I feel like this is a really rough discussion and I'm doing my best, but my head is all over the place today. And I apologize for that. Also, my audience has grown a lot in the last week, so it's really weird. There are a lot of people where this is probably their first time seeing one of these streams. The other ones are less organized than this one is, but they're also like better worded. So it's fascinating for me to be in the process of like learning about this. But I feel like most of what I'm saying is easiest, or most of what I'm saying is pretty solid and easy to understand. And yeah, what B said is very accurate. So stepping in between people who are fighting and taking, yeah, like taking someone out of a conflict, moving them away, like actually physically disrupting them, isn't often recommended, but it can definitely be a very valid tactic, especially if a conflict isn't likely to get physical. If a conflict isn't likely to emerge and erupt into actual violence, then actually physically disrupting the two people who are in the process of conflicting is actually a really smart move. Because if two people who are in conflict work close to each other, then obviously they are going to be more likely to be disruptive. The conflict is going to grow naturally and it's going to be harder to stop later on. But if you see two people who are engaged in a bit of a squabble, if they are bickering, then you can move them away and you can actually disrupt the conflict. And then you can make it so that if someone really wants the conflict to get worse, they really have to try, which is a really important thing to keep in mind. And if you are engaging in conflict work, you want to make it harder for the conflict to grow. Yeah. Okay, good. That was a solid, easy to explain thought. So really appreciate that, Bij. That was fantastic. Thank you for that comment. And I mean that sincerely. I hope I don't sound sarcastic. I feel like oftentimes I can. But yeah, so another thing that can be done to disrupt a conflict is to engage in peacemaking activities. And remember that conflict disruption is not the same as peacemaking, but peacemaking can be something really small. It can be creating opportunities for people to just have a conversation in a positive way that is mediated, that is facilitated. Let's see. If you're dealing with people that are just impossible to deal with, then running, as Mrs. Snarky just said, is a very valid tactic, especially if there's an opportunity for you to move so far away that they have to come to you if they really want to disrupt you. But if you are in a situation where you can't run away, then acknowledging their presence and telling them that they are being disruptive, that they're being frustrating, can be a thing to do. But oftentimes, the worst kinds of people, the people that you're probably thinking of in this sort of situation, would be enraged by that. So that's a really complex thing to try and work through. But there are ways that someone can actually work through it that are positive. One of the things that people can do is they can be like, this person is frustrating, but here's some positive things about them. And also, if you create opportunities for other people to voice their frustration, especially if you are not a minority, but other people haven't yet voiced their frustrations to the person who's being disruptive, then in just saying like, hey, I know I'm not alone in being frustrated by this person's antics is a very valid approach. And that will be humiliating. That's something that people need to be aware of. But it's also a valid thing to do, especially if the person actually wants to be good at their job. In a lot of cases, people who are disruptive, people who are frustrating to deal with, people who are giving people a hard time don't mean to do this. And it's better to assume that someone is acting out of ignorance than out of maliciousness. And also, if someone is acting out of maliciousness, then one of the things on the bright side is that they'll be really obvious. Because if someone's acting out of maliciousness and they decide to continue engaging in the activity that they were doing, then if you spoke to a manager or if you created an opportunity for other people to voice their discontent and they did, and that person continues doing the thing, then it's obvious that this person's intentionally disrupting work. And that will cause managers, at the very least good ones, to act and to move in the right direction. I would love to have conversations in the future about like specific things and specific situations, especially because that gives me vital practice and it gives me the ability to learn before I engage in more conflict work that I can use in the future. So if people have specific things that they would like for me to talk about, if they have specific scenarios they'd like to hear my thoughts on, I would be absolutely down to do that. I would love to hear their thoughts. I'd love to hear about their problems in the workplace. Because honestly, like this is the real reason why I am learning about conflict work. I want to help people. And I know that helping people in the workplace oftentimes doesn't really feel like all that much unless someone has a positively miserable experience in the workplace. But the reality is, we spend a lot of our days in the workplace, especially if we are regular members of the workforce who work like 9 to 5 and who work 5 days a week. We spend a lot of time in the workplace. 40-hour work weeks are a big deal. That's a lot of time that you're going to be spending in the office. Employees with really short attention spans are a funny thing to try and deal with because I feel like how problematic that is really depends on the specific industry. I can think of several industries where someone with a really short attention span isn't that big of a deal, but then I can think of others, like industries where I've worked, where someone having a really short attention span would be potentially disastrous for the rest of the employees. When I worked at a Burlington coat factory, I was one of the people who worked in the back. I opened up boxes and I like put stuff up on the shelves. So I was like a packer and I guess sort of a decorator of the store, which is a really weird, a shelver. That's what we were called. Um, a decorator of the store is probably the worst way I could have described that. But yeah, I worked as a shelf stocker, and that's also really bad. wording. I worked as someone who put stuff on shelves and also who like put together furniture. And people who had low attention spans were some of the most frustrating people to work with in that sort of situation because that is such a like it's such a monotonous task that if you have a really short attention span, it's going to be really hard for you to stay focused, for you to stay in the moment. And at the very least, in the Burlington Coat Factory that I worked in, I sure hope that I am continuing to go because sometimes I am like, yeah, sometimes I see myself buffering. And getting them to focus was a really important thing that we had to do, which was really frustrating. But as a response to what Puffa, I'm going to butcher this name, but Puffalopagus just said, where they're in a store where the coworker sets out to pick on you and insult you on a daily basis. Oof, that's really frustrating because that person is seeking a confrontation. But if that person continually seeks a confrontation, I'm hoping that there is a manager somewhere in the scene who can react, who can watch, and that you can alert to the fact that this is going on. And that even if it's like, hey, if you don't believe me, keep an eye on me in my next couple of shifts where I'm working with this person. You're going to notice it. You're going to see that this person is belittling me. You're going to see that this person's antagonizing me. And I need your help here. I don't want to fight this person. I want to resolve this conflict in a meaningful way. And that's something that's really frustrating. I would hope that managers at that store or wherever it is that you are would notice that and would intervene organically because it can be really frustrating if you feel as if you have to be the one to initiate this. Something that a lot of managers need to do, and this is something that I've noticed in a lot of places I've worked, they need to stop hesitating to engage in mediation themselves. They need to be willing to step up and step in without someone speaking up and being like, hey, I'm in a bad situation. One of my coworkers is doing some stuff to me that's not cool. Managers need to be dynamic, they need to be engaged, and they need to go out of their way to resolve conflicts before conflicts turn into something a lot worse, because a conflict in and of itself isn't an inherently negative thing. I've talked about this in the past. Violence is inherently negative, but conflict itself doesn't have to be. And it's really frustrating that you're going through that. My Twitter DMs are always open. If you need to have a conversation about this, feel free to talk to me. My Twitter is Luciano Writes. Also, if you guys are seeing this and you don't already follow me on Twitter, although all of the people that are always here already follow me on Twitter, but if you don't, my Twitter is Luciano Writes. And if you guys are having a problem, if you guys need someone to talk to, I'm always someone that you can talk to. I work as a communicator, I work as a writer. I'm here to help you guys out. And that is extremely frustrating. I'm sorry that that's a thing that's happening to you because your manager needs to step up. Like your manager needs to show initiative. They need to not just be waiting for conflicts to occur before they step in. They need to actively take on a role of being, I'm in charge here. It's my task to create an environment of care, an environment of openness, and to not wait until my employees feel harassed enough to come to me. So I hope that your manager steps up without you having to say anything because I know how uncomfortable that could be. And I'm sorry that that's going on at your place of employment. So I am going to start to wrap this up. I'm going to talk more about different types of conflict plans in the future. Oh, yeah, that makes it a lot worse. Boss, okay, so in case anyone here can't see the comments or can't see the chat, especially people who check this out later and don't want to like read the actual chat as it's happening, the boss lived with the other guy in Jordan for about 15 years. So that's one of those situations where do you work for like a chain or are you working for like a local shop? Like a that's the really boy, I'm not good at English today. Do you work for like a chain or do you work for like a different kind of store? Because if you work for a chain, then there should be a mechanism in place for you to be able to file a complaint and for you to be able to voice your concerns healthfully by pointing out that, like, A, there's kind of a conflict of interest in my boss managing this conflict, and it might result in me being axed. So that's something that's really frustrating, especially if that's a fear that you have. But like, You've been listening, but you haven't been able to see the screen. That was something that was going on when I first like turned on the screen. I first turned on my camera. My camera's been on this whole time. Hopefully, this will resolve itself so anyone who watches this later on will be able to see me as opposed to just seeing like my avatar. Although if they can only see my avatar, that's fine. Um, but that is really weird. Um, I honestly hope that Puffalopagus's situation gets better. Feel free to contact me about this later. I'll see if there's anything that like we can do because that's a serious situation. Oh, then yeah, if it's a privately owned business and the owner is the boss, I'm not going to say look for a new job, but if that's the case, then you're probably going to need to bring in outside arbitration, and that might not even be an option unless you pay for that out of pocket. That is okay, cool. I'm really glad that the wasn't a technical issue. That was I was nervous about that because that has never been something that's happened to me. Also, my internet went down an hour ago and was down for a good 15 minutes, so I'm glad that it didn't like crash during this. Um, So in next week's Monday live stream, Peace and Conflict Studies live stream, I'm going to be talking about conflict management. And I'm also going to be talking about community conflict plans. I'm not going to do the same sort of overview of a conflict plan that I did this time. I'm also going to work on updating my website so that way people can see more regularly that this is a thing that I do, that Monday nights and either Friday or Thursday nights, I'm not entirely sure, I'm going to be doing my humanism and politics and governments live streams. That's really, really frustrating. And not that, but like the comments. I honestly wish that there was something else that we could do to help you out, Puffalopagus. But that sort of situation is something that is really difficult to resolve because there's no real desire to resolve that from the people in charge. So it's basically an employee just having to deal with harassment and having to deal with bullying. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important that people and managers, especially managers, create environments of trust and openness. That is something that I'm going to talk about in the future. I did a mini live stream last year where I talked about how to create an environment of openness and like transparency. That's really important in peace and conflict studies, especially in the workplace. I don't really want to focus on workplace related peace and conflict studies, but the reality is it's one of the most important areas of peace and conflict studies. And I want to have conversations with people. I want to help people resolve their workplace issues. I want to be an active and positive part of someone's workplace experience. And I also want to gain the experience that comes with this sort of work because this sort of work helps people get jobs. There's always people who are hiring in workplace conflict management. And that's something that people need to be aware of when they're thinking of what they want to do with their career and what they want to study. Also, hey Terry, I'm sorry, but you were coming in at the tail end of this particular live stream. On Mondays, my live streams always go from about 8 to usually 8:30, 8:45. I sometimes do after parties. I'm not going to do an after party for this week's live stream. I will be doing one for next week's live stream, and I am going to be doing one for Friday's live stream. Now that we are at the end of the live stream, I'm going to talk a little bit about some just sort of technical stuff on my end. Tomorrow, a Spanish video might be coming out. I'm probably going to be talking about humanism in Spanish. For those of you who don't know, I do Spanish videos quite often this year. I've actually been really, really good at doing Spanish videos, which is really exciting. But I want to talk about atheism, secularism, and humanism in Spanish. And I feel like that's really important because there aren't that many voices out there on YouTube who are actually actively creating atheistic content. And I want to be one of the people who starts to change that because in order for people to start creating content in this area, someone's got to be the first voice who speaks up and says, I'm going to commit myself to doing regular stuff in Spanish. And I'm sorry that that is going to make some of my content not super watchable for some people, but part of the reason why my video for tomorrow, which has already been filmed, just hasn't been subtitled yet, might be coming out later than tomorrow is because I want to make those videos have English subtitles for people who want to watch them. And I'm here to help people. I'm not just here to help people in their workplace. I'm also here to encourage people to be honest with their families and to be honest with their communities about atheism and humanism and secularism. And I think that honestly, my Spanish videos are probably some of my favorites. I really like the videos that I make in Spanish. I'm really proud of the stuff that I say, even if my Spanish isn't perfect, because it's not. It's just not. Um, it's really fun for me to create videos and to create content in my first language. Also, if you have $1 a month that you can afford to give to a content creator that you like, and you like my stuff, whether you like this weekly live stream series, or you like the humanism and politics live stream series, or you like my videos in Spanish, or just my random videos, then I strongly recommend, if you have that option and you have that money that you can put to someone that you like, checking out my Patreon and consider becoming a Patreon of mine. I am creating a unique mini newsletter for global conflicts and for news related to peace and conflict studies, where I talk and share news related to the latest ongoing conflicts. And it's a really fun thing. One, like a little sample is going to be coming out at the end of this week. It was supposed to be coming out tomorrow. My internet went down a couple of days ago and it just sort of ate the newsletter, which is the real reason why it's not coming out tomorrow like I wanted it to. But that is it on my end. I hope that you guys have a positively beautiful day, or night in the case of most people, because the overwhelming majority of my viewers live in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, Western Hemisphere. So most of us are on USAian or Latin American time, and it's night for most of us. But no matter what time zone it is, I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will talk to you later. This has been a lot of fun, and remember, every Monday and every Friday or Thursday, I'm going to be live streaming. So always feel free to check out my Twitter. Check that out. Adios, people.